Those of you who do not know Scott, basically Scott is one of the most important, if you will, and authoritative voices about innovation, basically, in the world. He writes the innovation column. He has the innovation beat for the Boston Globe. He writes for all the cool magazines. He's just written an amazing book about basically, like creativity or lack thereof in the entertainment industry, in the movie industry, right? And he's a darling of all the people who are changing the world that we live in. So if you would please let's give an Olin Innovation Lab welcome to the one, the only Scott Kersner. Let's go!
Oh, well, thank you, Thorne, for the great introduction. I was never clear on what an Olin Innovation Lab welcome was until today, so thank you for that. I'm impressed that you guys were all here half a day yesterday for the program. All right. So when Thornton asks me to speak, that's usually code for don't give your usual crappy stump speech. We want to hear something new. So I decided to put together a new talk so as not to disappoint Thornton and have him nodding off in the background there. And I have some video clips and a lot of images in the talk, so if you can't see the screen, I'd encourage you maybe to relocate to some of the expensive seats here. I guess the people endowed those seats and didn't show up this morning or whatever. So I won't be insulted if you want to move. So what I want to talk about, I want to show some examples, but mostly I want to have a conversation during the Q&A time about some of the things that people don't like to talk about innovation, the innovation process. So I've titled this The Unengineerable, Unpredictable, Unspoken Truth About Innovation. And really I want to hear from you what some of the secrets are that people don't like to discuss. As Thornton mentioned, I'm a journalist, mostly a journalist and author, and I feel like I have one of the best jobs in the world in that I get to visit tiny little startup companies that don't even have an office yet, and they try to hide the fact by saying, could we meet at Starbucks? And all the way up to Fortune 50 companies like Ford Motor, Boeing, Microsoft, Google. So from the small to the very big in all kinds of different fields, I get to look at the innovation process and sort of see how do companies come up with new ideas, but more interestingly, how do they release those new ideas into the wild and either see them succeed or see them flop miserably. And I think one of the unacknowledged truths about innovation is that most will flop. And I actually think that most will flop because there are a lot of just unmanageable elements of both innovation, kind of the idea itself, the product itself, and also just the wild, the world that we live in, can be really hard to control. I'm using a new remote here. So I feel like I read, and I'm sure all of you read, all of these books about innovation. I get a new review copy every week, practically, of a business book with the word innovation in the title. And they're all kind of trying to present a unified field theory of how do you do innovation right. What is the infallible recipe where you can take your idea and your talent and make it into the next Apple, the next Google, the next Twitter, the next something really successful. So they're all kind of trying to come up with this 7-step plan, and you read the books, and I feel like a lot of people will finish a book about innovation and go, okay, I'm going to try to follow these steps, and then inevitably you kind of go off the rails because the real world intrudes. And then of course, you have these company meetings, or I go to visit startups, and they have a really clear sense of like, okay, the known costs of producing this product or getting this thing out of the market look like this pie chart, and this is 6 months before you launch it. And then of course you have to have the hockey stick graph of here's what our market share is going to do, or here's what our sales is going to do. And after a while you start to laugh when people walk you through these PowerPoints, right? And they're saying, okay, today it's 1998, and we're going to tell you what our revenues are going to be in 2013 because the spreadsheet says what they're going to be. So I think what interests me the most about innovation is that it kind of is, this was such a beautiful picture on my laptop screen. Maybe we just need to turn off more lights here. We should turn off all the lights. You can see it's like the night sky. Now I know how to control it. So I think innovation has this unpredictability. It's like, you're looking up into the sky and like, where is that meteor going to show up? Where should you look? And I think you just have to have all the right elements in place, the technology, the idea, the super smart team of people, the product itself, and then you kind of have to count on the collision of your idea with the culture, with consumer psychology at this moment, with market dynamics. And so that's what makes it really interesting as a process to me. I think since I showed a meteor slide, I have to show my favorite meteor comic by Hugh McCloyd. If you can't read in the back, it says, "Never try to sell a meteor to a dinosaur. It wastes your time and annoys the dinosaur." So I think one of the aspects of innovation is that most people hate it. Most people don't want to change. Most people don't want to hear your idea. But of course, we're all going to innovate anyway. I think the next slide is sort of my central theme today is that a lot of what's written and said about innovation is reverse engineering in the rearview mirror what worked. And that's really easy to do. It's really easy to look at a success and say, oh, it's clear why, FedEx owns the overnight shipping industry today because, Fred Smith had this brilliant idea in 1971. It was obvious that he was going to build up this, worldwide fleet of airplanes that were going to carry anything. That were going to carry a kidney from, Los Angeles to Boston so it could get implanted in someone today. But I think innovations are really impossible to engineer in real time, and that's something that most people are afraid to say because it's not a really encouraging message. But I want to talk about that sort of scary stuff today. I'm going to turn off the light and see if I can figure out how to play this clip here. Okay. This is my favorite clip about the nature of innovation.
This time, come on. Please, come on.
So there's so many things to love about like that moment in Back to the Future, and that it has, the failed innovation in it, right? They're driving a DeLorean, which was, this really wonderful car that never quite took off, but they've also hacked it together, so it's kind of a prototype of something else. They've made a time machine with all these random pieces and a lot of creativity. And yet you're also still waiting for kind of that Benjamin Franklin moment of, the lightning striking the clock tower and going down that cable and the DeLorean being in the right place at the right time. So, not only was this one of the great sort of campy movies of the 1980s, but it really does capture, I think, that essence of innovation of you not only need to have the idea, the prototype, put it together, but being kind of in the right place at the right time can be important too. One example that I'd like to show, more from the from the internet world and less from the automotive world, is this website that launched in February of 2005, and that's what it looked like in its original incarnation. And when you look back at something like YouTube, you kind of have to wonder, like, what was the element of this innovation that made it succeed, and all of the other sites that said we want to help people share video on the internet really haven't succeeded. I wrote an article for the New York Times in 2005 where I interviewed 6 or 10 entrepreneurs that were all trying to do video sharing. And one of them was Chad Hurley, who had started YouTube with 2 friends of his. And it was impossible to tell in the middle of 2005 who was going to succeed, because there were some people that said, you know, we want to do higher quality video than YouTube, but we're going to charge people a monthly subscription price based on the amount of video that they upload. There were people that picked different video formats and made it easier or more difficult to sort of take the video from this website and embed it into your MySpace page or put it on your blog. So there were all these dynamics that you couldn't really understand at the time, and you almost wonder what element of randomness was it with YouTube where, you know, they said we're going to do it for free and we're going to trust that at some point if we have a big enough audience, advertising is going to support it. The fact that they picked Flash as the format for their video as opposed to any other video format they might have picked. The fact that they really emphasized, you know, we want you to leave a comment on the video and rate it with 1 to 4 stars, and, you know, even post your own video response. So they really emphasized kind of the community element. It wasn't just go to this website to watch a video. And some people would even say that what really made YouTube a success was the fact that they weren't, at the beginning, strict about enforcing pirated content. And so kids would go and they would take the latest, you know, the Saturday Night Live sketch from last Saturday and upload it to YouTube, and that's what helped drive a lot of views. And this is one of those stories where, you know, that right combination of ingredients plus the reaction of the marketplace. They started the website in February 2005, and they sold it to Google in October of 2006 for $1.65 billion. So I think rarely does everything come together that quickly, but still kind of an interesting example to look at. I want to show the one of the most famous ads about a new technology ever, and then follow it with one of the least famous ads about new technology ever. And what's interesting is that they're both from the same company.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information for the first time in all history of a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of any complicated thoughts. Education, of course, is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our hands shall talk themselves off, and we will bring them with their own conclusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So that ran during the Super Bowl of 1984. And then here's one of the least famous ads about new technology.
Meet the lady. Her name is Lisa, and she's the most exciting thing to happen in computers today. The Lady Lisa, beautiful, a classic triumph for Apple. Pure and simple graphic images and a clever pointer device called a mouse. But most importantly, unlimited expandability, unlimited power. Lisa, from Apple, the future today at Wallace Micromart.
So what I love, you know, you had Apple introducing the Lisa in 1983, and thinking, okay, IBM seems to be getting some traction in the market for its PC, getting into businesses, and so obviously there's a lot of opportunity there. We're going to create this computer, the first with the GUI, the first to use a mouse, and we're going to sell it to business users for $10,000 a pop. And clearly that's, you know,
I bought some.
that's the field of opportunity. And are they on eBay now, or they've already been?
I still have
already
the
been
faceplate.
offloaded.
I saved the faceplate.
Yeah. You will donate that to the Computer History Museum. And then a year later, so in a way there are a lot of lessons here, but one of them is maybe kind of knowing what knowing what your competencies are and knowing sort of who you will resonate with in the marketplace or who will resonate with your product. So the Lisa, for serious business users was kind of, was a big flop for Apple, although they tried for 3 or 4 years to kind of figure out what the right combination of features and components were going to be. I think that this is true about the Lisa, was that it was the first, sort of multitasking computer that was brought to market, multitasking kind of PC computer that was brought to market, where one application wouldn't crash the whole operating system, which didn't happen again for quite a few years. And then the Macintosh coming out the following year, being sold for $2,500 to consumers and students and small business people, did a lot less than the Lisa. It didn't have that multitasking ability, but that was sort of the rocket ship, the meteor for Apple, that really ensured, I think, that they were going to be a company that would at least survive the 80s, although they had their trials later on. So to me, just kind of, not just an example of, good advertising, bad advertising, but, figuring out, where are your company's competencies and where do people, where does the market want you to be, which is kind of interesting. I like the idea that great entrepreneurs and great innovators are open to receiving inspiration, to being inspired anywhere. This is the out-of-town newsstand in Harvard Square. Bill Gates was going to Harvard in 1975. He wasn't quite sure what he was going to study. He hadn't declared a major. But Paul Allen was also here in Boston working for Honeywell in 1975, and he went to Out-of-Town News and bought a copy of Popular Electronics, the January 1975 issue. And it inspired them that, the Altair 8800, the mini computer, the PC was really the next big opportunity. And this is what Gates said: as we read about the first truly personal computer, Paul and I didn't know exactly how it would be used, but we were sure it would change us and the world of computing. And some of you may know the story that they called up the president, Ed Roberts, the president of the company that made Altairs, and said, we're writing a basic interpreter for your computer. But at the time, they didn't actually own an Altair, nor had they written a basic interpreter, but they just sort of wanted to gauge the interest of, like, if we could do this, maybe would they buy it? And the answer was, yes, and they got a deal with MITS, the company that made the Altair. So I love that, that moment of these two guys who had known each other from Seattle, happening to be in Boston at the same time, really not sure kind of where their careers were going to take them, and obviously big things happened from there. I think when you read a lot of these books about innovation, that some of the titles that I showed you, they always emphasize kind of the market research aspect of, like, going out to talk to people in various ways, formal, informal, surveying people, trying to get a lot of input on your ideas and your prototypes and your alphas, and responding to that feedback. But I actually think sometimes great innovations totally tune out certain kinds of feedback. And certainly entrepreneurs will tell you that they get some good feedback from people and some really horrible feedback that either says, don't do this, or, do a feature set that would be completely irrational. And so one of the interesting things is, how and why do people listen to the feedback that they listen to and tune out the feedback that they shouldn't listen to? This is just a great movie clip about feedback.
You really liked it, sire? Well, of course I did. It's very good. Of course, now and then, just now and then, it seemed a touch, what do you mean, sire? Well, I mean, occasionally it seems to have, how should one say, how shall one say directly? Too many notes, Your Majesty. Exactly. Too many notes. I don't understand. There are just as many notes, Majesty, as are required, neither more nor less. Yeah, no, there are, in fact, only so many notes the ear can hear in the course of the meeting. And I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Lord Composer? Yes. Yes. On the whole, yes, Majesty. This is absurd. My dear young man, don't take it too hard. Your work is ingenious. It's quality work. And there are simply too many notes. That's all. Just cut a few and it'll be perfect. Which few did you have in mind, Majesty?
So, I think we've all had that moment of getting feedback where you're like, this is really not feedback I should respond to, and yet sometimes it comes from a really important source. And this, of course, some of you may not have seen the movie Amadeus if you're too young, but, Chris, you should see the movie. It's very good. The next example I want to show, is sort of related to this idea of feedback, but also the idea of when do innovators kind of respond to rejection and say, you know what, I'm going to have another idea, let me leave this idea behind and move on to the next one, versus when do you just kind of say, that was just a rejection, I'm going to brush it off and go ask the question to someone else. And there's a company in Boston that's been really, for me, it was one of the interesting success stories because I met one of the founders, Tim Healy, when he was kind of a junior guy at a venture capital firm. And then 7 or 8 years later, I met him again, and he was the CEO of a publicly traded company called Enernoc. And they had the really interesting idea that a problem to solve would be to go to utilities and say, rather than build a new power plant, we're actually going to supply you with, instead of megawatts, we're going to supply you with negawatts. So we're going to basically sell you a service that will prevent you from having to build that new coal-fired or nuclear power plant. And so, if Olin was one of their customers, Olin would say, all right, at times of peak power consumption in July, we're going to let your network automatically turn off 10% of our lights or turn down our air conditioning 5%, so that you won't have to have those extra power plants for moments of really high demand. So, really interesting idea. The company, Tim and his founder David, pitched 37 venture capital firms. And what David told me was, we just figured we were going to run through any barrier presented to us. So they were going to ignore any kind of rejection because they felt like this was an idea that was going to work, despite all these venture firms, including the firm that Tim used to work for, rejecting them and telling them that the idea wasn't going to work. And you guys, business school grads, we love you, but why don't you try a different idea? Why don't you go work for somebody else? And so Enernox market cap, they're based in Boston, lots of huge customers, 760 million market cap, the stock's trading at $30 a share. Really great success story. Now, of course, they have all these copycats that are trying to do the same thing now that they've proven the idea. One of my favorite quotes about innovation comes from Bob Metcalf, who's a venture capitalist now, founded 3Com, has been sort of an academic inventor, an entrepreneur, and now an investor. And he likes to say, invention is a flower, innovation is a weed. And I love how that gets at the sort of, the notion that to come up with a new technology or new idea or patent something, that's great. There are lots of patents that, that have been filed that haven't changed the world, even in a small way. But the innovators kind of have this stubbornness, this resilience, this ability to kind of see, how their idea is going to spread, kind of like a weed. So that's just a quote that always, that I think gets at this unspoken nature of innovation, which is, which is how hardy it is, and kind of how hard it is to get it to spread. I think I want to talk about the, some of your thoughts about what doesn't get said enough about innovation. In closing, for me, the two things that I think I find when I talk to innovators that is never the spoken message, but it's kind of the subtext, is one, they're always kind of open to possibility. Like that Bill Gates, Paul Allen moment of reading the right magazine at the right time. They're open to an introduction. You know, it's funny, great entrepreneurs to me are always when you tell them like, hey, you should meet John McElhaney, you know, they write it down as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, that's interesting. You know, they want to take advantage of those possibilities for the introduction that, you know, that could change, or the customer connection that could change the course of history for them. And then perseverance is the other thing. And, you know, often I think about perseverance when I think about, you know, these companies that it does require 10, 20, 30 years to change the world sometimes. It doesn't always happen as quickly as it does with YouTube. And there are entrepreneurs that just realize, you know, look, we've spent our first round of funding, let's go get the second round. We spent the second round, let's go get the third round. And they just realize it's going to take a long time. I think interestingly, they don't always tell their investors that it's going to take a long time. You know, they're always just 1 quarter away from getting into the marketplace. So these are my coordinates, but I'd love to either take some Q&A or take some reaction. As I mentioned, this is the first time I've given this talk, so feedback would be great. But I also would love to hear, you know, some of your thoughts of as you read Harvard Business Review, as you read these books about innovation, as you kind of collect your own experiences. What are some of the things that don't, you know, that don't get said in all of the, you know, 7-point plans and all of the recipes for how to make yourself a more innovative person, how to make your team more innovative, how to make your organization more innovative?
Well, Scott, if I could just, as someone who's been covering this space, the innovation space, how has it changed? I mean, give us a, you know, sort of a, when did you start, you know, following innovation, and like to today, and like how is it the same? Are these rules like universal, or is it a different zeitgeist, if you will?
You know, I haven't been covering innovation for long enough to have, you know, a grand arcing impression of it. But, you know, I started covering it actually after building Boston.com, sort of getting Boston.com off the ground for the Globe in 1995 and 1996 and 1997. So I started it kind of as a web developer builder type person, and then went over to journalism. But I think you know, really having one of my early jobs kind of as the web was happening. Even before that, I'd worked at a management consulting firm and kind of was trying to convince our clients that the web was going to be important, you know, in 1994. And some of you remember, you know, the browsers were terrible, and there was really nothing to look at on the web of consequence, except for, you know, I remember you could go to, you know, UC Berkeley's website, and they would tell you whether there was any Diet Coke left in the vending machine on the 7th floor. And so I kind of came at it from a moment where the spread of innovation was starting to happen really quickly. But I think I do see, you know, when you go to organizations like, you know, you visit a General Motors or a Disney or a company that's been at it for a long time, I think a lot of them take that sort of old school approach to innovation, which is let's develop something in the R&D lab for years and years and years before we ever actually show it to a human being outside of our organization. And I think that approach is kind of becoming outmoded. You know, the approach of you know, investing and having these skunk works and teams that just work and work and work and never get any outside feedback until they're ready to launch something as a product and find out, you know, is it going to be the Macintosh or is it going to be the Lisa? Ron?
Scott, I wonder, something that's intrigued me for a long time, I wonder if you and others might think. The question is, can innovation be taught?
I mean, I think your answer to it would be yes, right? That's what you're trying to do. You know, that's what you're trying to do here at Olin. That's what a lot of things try to do at MIT. I mean, I don't think about pedagogy a lot and can you teach someone. I just think, can you expose them to innovation? And so a lot of what I'm interested in is just, you know, ways that you can bring entrepreneurs into contact with students, ways that you can create these business plan competitions that kind of walk them through the steps of creating a company, you know, ways that you can give them mentorship to do their own new ventures. So I kind of don't, I believe that it can be taught by looking at case studies and examples in the classroom, but probably it can be taught more effectively by saying, you know, why don't you have an idea whether it's good or bad, take that and try to shape it into something that's going to be a, you know, be a product or be a company.
Yeah. So up until a few weeks ago, I was running a company that did software product engineering. So we developed software products for Oracle and Autodesk and Google and embedded software engineering, that type of thing. And so we're a couple $100 million, a few thousand people, and we had the challenge of if people were going to outsource their engineering talent to us, we have to be innovating for them. A lot of innovation comes through. So we had to think about how we created an innovation culture within the company and a process and a mechanism to promote it, to push it, to encourage it, to compensate. So it actually became a multi-year process to create a culture where people were thinking every day and they were judged and teams were judged and clients judged us on how much we innovated. So I don't know if that's teaching, but it's certainly creating an environment to get people to think outside the box.
But, you know, to me, the thing that's interesting when you say culture of innovation, in a way, I feel like when you visit any company, that, you know, you sort of have to pick your projects that the resources are going towards, and at a certain point, you know, that person coming into the meeting and saying, like, you know, I have an idea about another project that we should be doing instead of these projects that we've picked, or, you know, you're 3 months from launch, and like we left out this feature, and I think this would be really important. Like, innovation can be really an annoyance, and you know, and a really political game of, you know, someone who's not liked pitching an idea that might be a good idea, but they're just seen as like, gosh, you're the guy who always, you know, who always throws the, you know, the wrench into everything at the last minute. Why did you have that idea, you know, a year ago when we first started talking about this? And even at Google, like the example I like, you know, every one of these books about innovation cites Google and Apple as, you know, it's like mandatory. I think the publishers say, like, well, where's the Google example if you try to get a book published without talking about Google as the most innovative company? And you go to Google, or last time I was there, you know, the two things that I noticed are, one, you know, everyone has their 20% time to work on some cool new project, and yet there's a tremendous scrambling for getting any kind of resources to take your project from something that's just running on a server, you know, on a development server somewhere in the Googleplex, to something that actually gets launched and actually gets promoted to the real world.
To beta.
What's that?
To beta in the real world.
Yeah, to beta in the real world. But, you know, there is that scrambling of, you know, how do you get the resources to make something, you know, visible to the public and not hidden in, you know, the Google Labs website or whatever. And then the other thing was Marissa Mayer, you know, who's kind of the head of, I think, search product or search experience for Google, so one of the top 5 executives, was saying at this event I was at that, you know, she has 1 hour a week that she devotes to just open office hours, and anyone can come and talk to her. And the great thing is they have Wi-Fi throughout the building, so when there's a line of 38 people waiting to get into her office, you know, they can all be doing work on their laptops while they're waiting for her. So it was just interesting to hear that, like, even Google has this sort of resource and, you know, decision-making issue of there's so much innovation. You know, they truly have a culture of innovation, but what are we actually going to put our resources behind? You know, what's worth developing from prototype into product? Like, there's not enough room, even in this, on a website where you would think everything's infinite, you could put everything up there. You know, there's not enough room for all the innovation that they're, you know, that they're generating. Yeah,
and you're absolutely right, because we had to put in a process with an innovation council, because we got, first year we got 5,000 innovation. Now we had hundreds of clients, so it's not like we're doing it for one particular product set. But we had 5,000 or so, 5,200 innovation ideas. So we had to establish an innovation council. They had to determine which ones were considered. We had to categorize and consider which ones were appropriate to present to the client. Then you present to the client determines which ones get funded. But you're right, it can be. I mean, there's a lot of great ideas.
I'm sure there were never any complaints about, like, the Innovation Council and who was on it and how they made decisions.
No.
Whether they ever turned out an idea that, you know, the company should develop itself, right?
Yeah. No, it's actually worked very well. So it didn't become political.
Oh, that's good. That's surprising.
Scott, one thing I think I would add to your presentation, or at least touch upon, that I think every startup faces, is the idea that a startup is a series of catch-22s. You know, you got to have a product. You got to build out an ecosystem, but you got to have a product and have something interesting to get the ecosystem going. But yet you need the ecosystem to help get your product to be a complete product. So I find that there's, you know, part of the challenge of startup is narrowing your focus, picking a couple things, and it is exactly the challenge you said, that somebody comes in with some ideas at the last minute. But one of the most critical things is actually getting the product out in some form to start getting kind of closing the gap between what you think, which is what the internal view is, versus what you know, which is some feedback from customers. So there's always these catch-22s of kind of not having enough resources, but in fact having too many resources is really dangerous. And then kind of having a deadline to kind of get things out and getting feedback. So that's really critical to kind of getting the perspective of the culture of the team from an internal view to an external view.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And not every startup can sort of fool the CEO of a big company into saying like, oh yeah, we'll give you two, college students a chance to build a product for us, even though you don't own our computer. I think there are so many examples where either not building that ecosystem results in failure, or the FedEx example, which unfortunately they've kind of swept under the rug, is that they actually started FedEx and realized they hadn't built enough demand in the marketplace. Like they thought about leasing the planes and the operational stuff and how are we going to get an overnight letter from Seattle to Miami, but they hadn't really done the sales and marketing and generating enough demand to actually not lose insane amounts of money, and so they sort of had to stop the overnight delivery for a while and go out and sort of solve that problem and kind of build up the demand in the marketplace and then kind of restart it. But that could easily have killed the company. So great point. Other kind of thoughts about
One of my favorite quotes is the author of Neuromancer, and he said, "The future's already here; it's just not evenly distributed." and I think that actually captures the notion that you had, that you let 1,000 flowers bloom, but only one or two are actually going to make it. And there's, I think, an appreciation, or there's often a lack of appreciation for the serendipity that's required. And that, whether it's market, underlying technology, I mean, we're talking a lot here about cloud computing, and most of us, the ones over 40 anyway, roll their eyes and say, oh yeah, it's time has finally come, because the underlying, technology, infrastructure, et cetera, can now make this take off.
Yeah.
But elements of cloud existed, 20 years ago in various forms. It wasn't called that or anything else. So you see this, you realize that there's so many things going on. It's like a cauldron of serendipity until it finally clicks, with someone pushing it, of course.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I hear that quote, the future's already here, it's not evenly distributed, I think about places where, I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years, where it feels like every new technology that's developed, suddenly 80% of San Franciscans are using it, and you can kind of make the assumption if you were out there that like, all right, this is going to be the next, Twitter's going to be the next big thing, and Foursquare is going to be the next big thing, and next bus, every city is going to have, these displays that tell you how many seconds it is until the bus shows up. Because every bus is outfitted with GPS transponders. So you can go places, or like the South by Southwest conference that was last week in Austin, you could go places where maybe there are too many early adopters, and you could sort of make the assumption that everything that's new, just because there's this group of people, probably a lot of you in the room, feel like, all right, there's an iPhone app that I just heard of, let me download it and try it. And you forget that not everyone is is that way, and lots of things get to 500,000, a million users, but never get beyond that level. I mean, there was lots of talk at South by Southwest last week about, location technology, and this idea of like having to sort of explicitly say to Foursquare or Gowalla or some other app, I am at Olin College, and then having it disseminate to all your friends, where you are, and whether that's something that's going to take off, or how that will be integrated into other apps, or maybe it needs to be kind of implicit of just you giving it permission to broadcast your location all the time, as opposed to launching something. So stuff is, it can be hard to tell if stuff is going to kind of get to escape velocity and get out of the Earth's atmosphere, or or just fall back down.
And then there were some innovators that came up with pleaserobme.com.
Yeah.
Based on that. It's not necessarily good to provide all that information.
Yeah, that's true. Chris?
So a lot of times in the entrepreneurship community here in Boston, we talk about the differences between Boston and Silicon Valley, and why a lot of people are moving out to Silicon Valley. Do you find that there's actually a difference in innovation over on the other side of the country as opposed to Boston?
I mean, I think there's more critical mass around internet, web, and maybe mobile innovation out in the Bay Area. I think what's interesting here is that you do have a lot of the kind of life sciences and energy innovation that isn't as isn't as much in the spotlight there. And so I think what's interesting about Boston, and kind of what's a strength here, and I try to write about it as much as I can, is that we may not be able to kind of go mano a mano in terms of internet with Silicon Valley or tech. They do have companies like like Intel and eBay and Apple, and you could make a pretty long list. but that there are some new industries. Robotics would be another good example, where Boston has this amazing robotics cluster and companies figuring out all kinds of cool, both consumer applications for robotics, like the Roomba vacuum cleaner, and also kinds of new industrial applications. There's a really neat company called Kiva Robotics that has basically rethought how warehouses are going to work. And Zappos is using them now to do order fulfillment. And I have a video in another presentation I should maybe include in this one, but it basically says rather than having warehouse workers roam around a warehouse, have the warehouse workers stay in the same place with a box and have the robots bring the product to that worker. So the robots are moving around picking up a rack of product here and they bring it to you. And so the worker just kind of has this constant parade of racks and they're just doing, like pick one product here, one product there, put it in the box, ship it. And it's just this incredible leap in efficiency that they've figured out.
Scott, how does Stanford operate differently than MIT and other universities in spawning innovation?
I don't think it operates very differently at all. I mean, there may be some nuances that I understand, that I don't understand, but I don't think it's really different at all in terms of, the way they approach technology licensing, the way they give professors the ability to kind of spend one day a week or so helping new ventures get off the ground. I think it's really similar. But if someone in the room knows that there are big differences, I mean, a lot of the real recent success stories in Boston that we've had are MIT success stories. If you look at the biggest IPO last year was A123 Systems, which is this next generation lithium ion battery company that their first product, they had a really good strategy for we need a near-term product and we need a long-term product. And the near-term product was just better batteries for handheld tools like a drill, that you don't want to have to, recharge it between every use. And so, they got, I forget if it was DeWalt or Black & Decker now, they got sort of an early customer in the tool market, and they said our long-term project is batteries for hybrid cars and fully battery-operated cars, and we know that that market is not going to be here really soon, but that's kind of when investors buy the stock, a lot of them I think are buying it on that long-term story if these guys are going to be a major component supplier to the next generation of cars. And that's a company, A123, where the scientist Yetming Chang is on the faculty at MIT, and they gave him enough time to work with the company to get it launched. And a bunch of the investors are MIT alums who really want to support promising, new technology companies coming out of MIT. And there are lots of examples like that. I think, Google would be a great example of, Stanford and Stanford professors supporting Stanford students taking something out of the university and making it kind of a real world innovation. Yeah.
Scott, that 123, what's the name of the company?
A123.
A123. A number of years ago, I happened to cover when they were moving into their new quarters in the Arsenal Mall, and they spent a good deal of time and an impressive amount of their venture capital creating an environment that they thought would induce this sort of, cross-pollination that leads to good ideas, and into this great, literally a tower and white building with this huge smokestack that had been operating in the 1800s and transformed it into this really cool open space with a lot of opportunities to foster innovation.
Yeah, I haven't. That's funny. I know where their offices are there in Watertown. I haven't been inside them, but I think there are, someone at some point will do a sociology and anthropology study on open office space and its impact on innovation. It'd be interesting to have some control.
They certainly, it seemed like they certainly felt it would make a difference.
Yeah.
In the amount that they invested.
Yeah, and you feel that one of the big insights at Google is that people like to eat and that they have all kinds of free-ranging, brainstorming conversations while they're eating and while they're drinking coffee or drinking smoothies. And so much of the this is true at Google and both at Google and at Pixar too, where the offices are really centered around the kitchen cafeteria, rather than it being sort of hidden off away, this little windowless lunchroom where people go and they microwave their ramen noodles and then they go back to their desk. So I should do that study on, office design and innovation. Yeah.
Actually, I work for an office company, Steelcase, and they spend about $70 million a year in research and development. And their findings are the office floor plan is the plan of the future to drive collaboration among people. And there's a whole study that comes out. So if on the Steelcase website, keying harder working spaces, there'll be a whole research that you can read about how the impact of the open environment collaboration.
All right.
Yeah, and there's another company called IDEO that I just figured out from Chevron, a design company based out of San Francisco.
Yeah, actually, IDEO is owned by Steelcase.
Oh, is it?
All right, we're making all kinds of connections across the room here.
Get a room! Get a room!
Yeah, Ben.
So you gave this talk about innovation, referred to a lot of innovators, most of whom were not bootstrapped, most of whom took outside capital, some from angels, some from private equity, some from your traditional venture capitalists. What's changed in the venture capital universe from your point of view in the last 24 months since the recession has hit hard and fundraising has gotten more difficult for these firms?
You know, I don't feel a lot of positive things have changed in the last 24 months in the venture capital world in terms of just, you know, the filter for, you know, as John was putting it, like how far have you gotten, you know, how much have you built, how many customers, how much revenue do you have even before we're going to give you that first, you know, $1 or $5 or $10 million investment. You know, that's a very different kind of risk profile than like, you know, we think you have a great idea on this cocktail napkin from the bar last night, you know, here's some money and go make it real. So I do think it's becoming a different business, but the thing that encourages me is I think, you know, particularly on the West Coast, there's a new model of angel investing where people will do, there's a guy, Dave McClure, who I think said he did, you know, 40 angel investments in a single year where it's, you know, where it's angel investors giving, you know, $50,000, $100,000 here and there, and not feeling like they need to sit on a, you know, have a board seat or give a whole lot of advice. Just saying like, you know, we believe in you, and we believe in you, and like it's a great idea. Go off and do it, and we're not going to intrude too much. You know, which is I think maybe a little bit more of what the venture model used to be, is that kind of backing the original dream as opposed to backing a company that, you know, has hit revenue, you know, has sort of has some customer contracts and has hit revenue, which is, I mean, not a bad thing, but it's just a very different thing from my perspective. Yeah.
So that was going to be one of my questions, because the model has changed too. We used to have the more of a waterfall kind of model where you had big steps and you had big VC investment stages, and now with this, you know, low barrier to entry, you don't have to buy servers, you can, you know, buy incremental, you know, pieces of things. That was really my question. Are the VCs starting to pick up on that, where you can make small investments, you know, incrementally and cut your losses along the way? Because the VCs I talk to don't seem to understand.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of VC firms that do believe that, because they still have this idea of like the way you control, you know, the way you get control and make sure things are going okay and sort of get your 2 cents in is to take a board seat,
right.
And that takes time.
Right.
And you know, so I don't see, maybe you Ben know or others know about models where a VC firm is saying, you know, we figured out how to do $100,000 or $500,000. You know, a lot of those firms will sometimes do 1 or 2 of them just because, you know, to sort of prevent people from criticizing them for not doing it, but they're not doing them at you know, at big scale. I don't think. Just one other thing that I was going to say, but yeah.
One model that's emerging is more of a hybrid model, where, to your point, the VCs will make a larger commitment in order to get control, but having control, then they'll set tranches up where they'll only allocate the money if it hits milestones, so that they can kind of get the best of both worlds,
right.
Be able to cut their losses but still get control.
Right. You know, the other thing I was going to say to your point, which I always hear, is like, oh, you could bootstrap a company with $10,000 today, and you know, look at Twitter. Like, why have they taken $150 million in capital if everything, you know, if the, you know, the software as a service cloud model can make any startup, you know, a global success without infrastructure? Like, they're building infrastructure to support Twitter, and the same thing with, you know, Google was a little bit earlier, but they really view like a key part of what they do is having all these data centers, and you know, they built their own servers for them. They didn't buy, you know, off-the-shelf servers, and so I'm a little bit skeptical of this. You know, 2 guys at the Starbucks can, you know, get $10,000 from mom and dad and build, you know, build the next Twitter, the next YouTube with that. Just because I haven't seen a whole lot of examples of that. Yeah, and maybe it's just too early in the days of cloud, and that really will be possible to build something giant on, you know, the Amazon infrastructure or Microsoft Azure or whatever.
Or maybe that's the wrong scale to determine success. Right. I mean, the Twitters, the Googles, there's only going to be a handful of those in any amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, there's a gigantic space that's below that.
All right, I give you that point.
Let's have a round of applause for Scott.